I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, I'll speak with Edmund Lee, editor of the New York Times Trust Team. We'll discuss how the Times is working to rebuild trust with its readers through transparency and innovative reporting. But first, global trade tensions escalated this week. President Trump proposed, then paused his sweeping trade tariffs. Writing in the New York Times, American Compass chief economist Oren Cass has analyzed the economic impact. He was also interviewed at nytimes.com by Ross Dowdett. Oren, people say tariffs are good, people say tariffs are bad, but everyone seems to agree that uncertainty and chaos are not good. So where does that leave us this week?
Well, I think we made a lot of progress actually with the announcement from the president on Wednesday. I think disruption is an inevitable part of what's going on here. In some senses, it's desirable. The administration has made clear it sees the old liberal world order and trading system that we've had since the end of the Cold War as irrevocably broken and intends to disrupt it and move it in a new direction. But when you do that, you want to keep costs as low as you can. And so I think the best example with this was on the so-called reciprocal tariffs that the administration was imposing on the vast majority of our trading partners pending negotiations. And frankly, they needed partners to understand that we would be willing to impose tariffs, but it didn't do a whole lot of good and was causing an enormous amount of cost disruption to have the tariffs in place from day one. And so postponing those and saying, look, these are out here, we will use them if we have to, but let's try to do the negotiations first, is a great way to get the constructive stuff done while keeping the disruption low where you can.
I guess that's putting the best face on it. And you wrote that, or said that opacity is a good thing because it gives the chief executive leverage, of course. But Tom Friedman wrote in the Times the other day that the message to the world from President Trump is, I could take the heat, that the impact on the market was so great that he had to at least pause the tariffs. Would you agree with that assessment?
I don't think so. I think certainly there was a significant market drop, but at the same time, I think the administration has been pretty clear at this point that it expected a market drop. I think certainly what they did see happening was that maybe the costs were larger than they expected, but that again, it wasn't clear why they wanted those costs, right? The goal was to force the hand of other countries, and all of those other countries, in fact, showed up and said, all right, we are ready to have a negotiation. Of course, the one country that did not, which was China, did not get anything relaxed. To the contrary, the president went even higher. And I think Jason Furman, was President Obama's chief economic advisor, is a professor at Harvard, has made the very good point that on balance, the actual tariff burden after Trump's announcement yesterday isn't much different than before, because China is such a large trading partner. So to bring the tariffs down on Japan, on the EU, and so forth, while ratcheting them all the way up to 125% on China, on balance, that's not a stepping back at all. But from the perspective of cost and uncertainty and disruption, it focuses our fire on the place where we have the biggest problem and the least prospect of a good outcome, and relaxes and smooths things where we do expect to make progress and want to have a good outcome. And so that strikes me as exactly what we should want to see the administration doing.
Oren, the purpose of tariffs can be all sorts of things. The president has various times said wanted to stop illegal drugs, pharmaceuticals coming into this country. Are tariffs going to reindustrialize America? We had an article in the Times the other day on Apple. Its investment in China is so enormous now, it seems like it can't possibly move its manufacturing facilities to the United States. And also with AI, with robotics, how many jobs is reindustrialization really going to create?
Well, look, the idea that companies can't move massive manufacturing footprints is obviously wrong. And the way we know it's wrong is because they were perfectly happy to do it the other direction, right? Go back and look at how quickly, how much manufacturing was shut down in the United States and moved to China in just the 2 or 3 years after we welcomed China to the WTO. If you want to look in other examples in the other direction, look how quickly Japanese automakers moved into the American South once Japan said it, agreed under very similar threat from tariffs that it was going to stop the growth of exports into the US and tell Toyota and Honda to go set up shop over here. So um, everybody loves to complain because nobody likes change, but the idea that change can't happen or it is simply a permanent fact of the world that we have to live with this imbalanced situation, I don't think makes any sense at all.
You,
It is. Go ahead, please.
you pointed out that liberals thought globalization was a great thing, and yet that was so disruptive. Is there any difference in terms of the disruption from tariffs?
Well, I think there's certainly disruption when you make a major policy change. If you create a lot of disruption in pursuit of a policy change that is bad and goes the wrong direction, that's certainly not an argument with for sticking for sticking with the bad thing. I think if we think about the disruption and costs that we will face as we try to adjust back to a better long run situation, in some respects, the way to think about it is it's an investment. I mean, what is that actual cost? In a lot of cases, the cost is actually the cost of taking the time to rebuild, to reindustrialize, to gain back the skills that we gave away, to gain back the supply chains that we gave away. One of the most infuriating elements of this whole situation is that when we were losing all the manufacturing, you had so many economists say, oh, don't worry, it doesn't matter where things are made, just let the market work, it'll be efficient. And then when you say, actually, we realized we do need manufacturing, we'd like to bring it back, they say, oh, well, you can't do that. The entrenched knowledge and supply chains are too valuable and you'll never have them. It just makes me want to slam my head on the desk. Of course, these things matter. It was a terrible, costly mistake to give them up and let go of them, to say we didn't want to have the know-how to make these things. We didn't want to be leaders in advanced semiconductors. There's absurdly irresponsible policy choices. And yes, now if we want to go back to being leaders in these things, we are going to have to make investments to build that. And as with any investment, you see costs up front and you see a return over the long run. And for too long, we have had policymakers not willing to do that. I think we should be celebrating the fact that we now have policymakers who are willing to do that.
What's the difference between a tariff and a tax? Aren't consumers going to wind up paying for this?
Well, a tariff is absolutely a form of a tax. And so as with any tax, it's important to ask a question about what's called the incidence. So there is, for economists, there's the place where you impose the tax, right? Let's say we have a corporate tax. The corporation pays the tax, but then you have to ask, okay, but where does that actually land? Who ends up seeing higher costs, higher prices, lower wages, lower investment returns, whatever the result might be? With a tariff, you have to ask the same question. I think there's, certainly good evidence that in most cases, some of that ends up in the prices that consumers pay. Some of it affects what businesses do and their margins. Some of it affects the producers in other countries. It depends on who the competitors are and where they are in particular. But it's important to say that the kinds of price increases we are contemplating, even with quite substantial tariffs, don't look anything like the kind of inflation that we experienced, particularly during the Biden administration, where you were seeing across the board 10% increases in prices within a single year. Imports are only about 15% of what we consume. And so if you push the price of all of that up by 10%, and there are no alternatives, you pay the entire price on all of it, the entire tariff on all of it, that's a 1.5% increase. If it takes a couple of years to phase in, that's less than 1% in a given year. And it's also really important to remember that unlike with inflation, that's tax revenue. So if you are paying the tax, if you are paying the tariff, you're not setting that money on fire. That's now money the government collects. So one thing we could do is use it to reduce our budget deficit, which would be hugely valuable and help with reindustrialization. One thing we could do is use it to lower other taxes, in which case the net effect to consumers is much lower. One thing we could do with it is to do yet more important investment to help actually support the rebuilding, for instance.
So we're not going to have to pay $3,500 for an iPhone, or are we?
No, there is no serious estimate or plausible case that we will pay $3,500 for an iPhone. First of all, even if you simply had to keep importing the iPhones from China, the price wouldn't go up to $3,500. As you start to manufacture in other places, there are other low-cost places besides China that Apple has begun working to manufacture. So are those slightly more expensive than China? Maybe, but not dramatically. And then in the long run, as you think about bringing production back to the United States, what we have found repeatedly when we do actually make the investment to rebuild in the United States is that the United States is a great place to build things. The Toyota Camry has more American-made content than any car from any of the big three in Detroit. That's worked out just fine. The question is whether you can create the incentives so that corporations do see it as in their interest to invest and build here. For a long time, we did the opposite. We said, we don't care, be our guest, go away. And we are finally saying, no, this is actually a priority for us.
President Trump, you said, needs to communicate a vision about tariffs. What is his vision?
Well, I think the important question on vision goes beyond the tariffs specifically to the question of what is this new arrangement in the international system that we want to see. Right? Since the end of the Cold War, the United States had a very clear view that, particularly when we were what's called the hegemon, the by far most powerful country in the world, that what was going to serve us best was to just support openness in the world, that free and open markets were incredibly important. And so we were happy to promote and protect that even when other countries were taking advantage of us. Likewise, from a defense perspective, we liked the idea that we were going to be the military power, and we were going to spend all the money, and everybody else could sort of rely on us. And what the Trump administration has made very clear is that world is over. And it's important to say we can debate about whether or not we like that world or would want it to be over, but that's beside the point. It's just a fact that world is over. And
A quick last question. The president, putting the best possible face on the plunge in the stock market, said, what a great time to buy stock. Was that good advice?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't think we should have elected officials giving stock market advice.
That's sort of outsider trading, isn't it?
I'm not sure what that means. I would always tell people, I think it cuts both ways. There have been people who I would say overreacted to the move in the market as if people should be entitled to put their money in the market and have it only ever go up. Equities reflect the expected future profits of corporations. Over the very long run, those are going to increase, and that's a good investment. But you can't ask to live in a world where public policy changes that would be good for the country, that might reduce corporate profits. Well, somehow we shouldn't do that because we can't allow because stocks must only go up. I think it's important to understand the risks you take when you invest in equities. And I think it's important for policymakers to focus on the American interest first and foremost.
Oren Cass, the chief economist at American Compass, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, bridging the gap between readers and journalism in the New York Times. With over 30 years of journalism experience, 10 of which were spent as a media reporter for the New York Times, Trust Team editor Edmund Lee is helping close what he calls the widening gap in readers' trust. To achieve this, he's exposing the human element behind our reporting as misinformation and AI-generated content proliferate in a contentious political landscape. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Ed.
Thanks for having me.
How do we do that when people are bombarded with information, bombarded with misinformation? Why should they trust the New York Times?
Well, first of all, the Times for over 100 years has been a trusted source of news across, all the different major topics from Washington to the city. The thing is that in this day and age, that kind of brand reputation doesn't have the same weight as it once used to, right? So we have to kind of rebrand ourselves. We have to kind of reteach to readers why we're important, why we're trustworthy. And a lot of that has to do with what I say is just explaining our journalism more. It used to be in a newsroom, it was like, we don't talk about ourselves. We're not the story. We can't think like that anymore. Readers are skeptical in the right ways, which is, how do you know this information? You can't just simply say, the Times says so, we were quoting X, Y, and Z subjects. We have to actually show the reporting process, how we gather this information, what kind of skepticism we apply to the information that we've heard. So that's part of the humanizing process. How we work is a way of sort of creating trust with readers.
You talk about the fact that the digital era has precipitated a decline in trust, that most people don't really understand how a newsroom works.
Right.
Some of the people working in the newsroom don't understand how a newsroom works. But how do we specifically make changes to help the reader, to guide the reader and say, this is important, this is different, this is a feature story, this is an analysis, whatever?
Yeah, no, so you're asking a tough question. That is an ongoing process right now in the newsroom in terms of how we telegraph to the reader what they're looking at right now. This is an analysis story, this is a feature story, this is a spot news story, this is a live story. So we have, little markers everywhere that explain it. We think that they're straightforward, but also it's a way of, we want to sort of show more specifically, where these stories are coming from, right? So datelines are an example of that. And it's an old convention, you have this all caps sort of, sort of set of letters at the start of a story, London, Washington, whatever it might be. A lot of readers we found have no idea what that means. They might understand that's where the story is taking place, but they don't know that the reporter was physically on the ground. We think that is an important to let readers know, because that is a big part of trust. Like, we were firsthand available, we were either eyewitnesses or we were close to the action. So we've now changed that convention. We say now reporting from London, reporting from Washington, reporting from the courthouse in the Southern District of New York, that kind of thing. That level of transparency, we hope, allows just sort of better understanding of how newsroom operates, how our reporters sort of all the sort of different reporting efforts that our writers go through. Just having more of that out there, I think, is important for readers to understand. In terms of an analysis piece or a feature, readers are pretty smart. They figure it out. They'll see the length of the story. They'll get into sort of the thesis. You'll see how that plays out. But it's all the other sort of bells and whistles that we're trying to modernize, and move beyond the old sort of print conventions.
What about the fundamental problem that most people get their breaking news elsewhere?
Right.
And therefore the Times is trying added value, lending our judgment, lending our experience, lending our analysis to things that people aren't going to get anywhere else. So how do people know they're getting straight news as opposed to someone's analysis of what's going on?
So we do have a moniker on our news analysis stories. We literally call it news analysis. And oftentimes in these analysis stories, we will have a snippet of text below the byline directly that highlights the specific reporter's expertise, how many decades they've been covering the White House, for example. And we think that's an important sort of place to sort of explain to readers, you're getting an expert opinion, right? Or you're getting an expert sense of what's happening here. But pretty much most of what we produce is straightforward news. I think that is the baseline. That is the sort of, you come through the door with that very basic understanding. Analysis, and we have opinion, which is a completely separate section. It's clearly labeled. People know what it is. We are still talking to readers about that difference as well. So it's a matter of telegraphing that more, and it's a matter of explaining it either through labels or through what we call these enhanced byline monikers. We also have little modules, what we call explainer modules, that appear within the articles itself this is a piece of news analysis, here's what that means. When we use anonymous sources in a story, for example, we have a little snippet of text in a story that says, when we use anonymous sources, we use them very carefully, we know who they are. The reason why we do things like that, in our surveys we found, for example, that a lot of readers think that anonymous sources are anonymous to us, that we don't even know who they are. That is absolutely not the case. So there's a very low level of news literacy in this country. It's just sort of gone down over the years, and so our job is to elevate that.
And it was always taken for granted.
It was always taken for granted, exactly.
What do we do with questions of false equivalency, saying he said this, she said that, and leaving it to the reader to decide? We've always had that problem dealing with the situation in the Middle East. We've been accused of being too pro-Israel, too anti-Israel. With Donald Trump, I know people who have accused us of being bending over backwards in the campaign to be fair or kind to Trump, and just the opposite from people on the other side. So how do we deal when there are two sides to an issue in a news story?
So there is this, I think what you're describing a lot with the criticism that we've received and that the news media in general has received is this notion of platforming, that you are, giving him, Trump, for example, too much of a voice. You're just letting him have a pass. And traditionally with journalism, a big part of our mandate is to relay, to, in a way, expose what's happening. We're giving you the information. We're not telling you what necessarily to think about it. And I think, that is still a point of tension with readers. Simply having an interview with Trump, they think is a bad thing to do altogether. We can't relinquish that, as journalists. Our job is to convey the information, the most powerful person in the world. We, of course, still apply context. We don't let his quotes run, endlessly. We will stop the quote where we think it needs to be stopped. We will add analysis and context around that as well. We will talk to other people. And it's not a both sides thing. We don't see it as a both sides approach. We see it as what is actually happening here? Who can help us understand what's happening? It's not necessarily he said this, they said that. And I think that's a misperception a lot of readers have, is that that's how we're always doing it. Objectivity isn't talking to one side and another side necessarily. Objectivity is, well, I don't have a preconceived notion of what is actually happening here, but the reporting is supposed to tell me, oh, I have a better idea of what actually happened. So getting to the truth. There are not two sides to the truth. There is a truth that we're trying to get.
And the truth is elusive, as we always find out every day.
It's very hard to get, especially with this particular administration. They announced big, huge, sweeping tariff program yesterday. There was a lot of confusion in the media, not just in our newsroom, but across a lot of newsrooms when he showed the chart, and we had to figure out what exactly are these tariffs referring to? How much more versus what you had announced previously? So there was some reformulating, there was some re-updating to our stories that had explained that based on what we had heard later. So news is an ongoing process.
The Times has a reputation as a liberal newspaper, however we define liberal. A lot of that is the result of our editorial policy, which I think it's fair to say is pretty liberal. But a lot of it also may be on the basis of what we decide to cover, if not how we cover it. So how do we deal with that when people see the stories we are covering, the topics we're covering, the things we may emphasize on the front page, that go beyond the actual opinion that we're expressing on the editorial page or the op-ed page or essays that people contribute as guest writers?
So, to be very clear, there is a strict division between the opinion side of the paper and the news side of the paper. They're completely separate staffs, and one side does not know what the other side is doing. So the news
That's
report,
fair to say.
Yeah, that is it. And I think it's an important thing to highlight, and it's a division that a lot of readers, first of all, aren't even aware of that it exists. But even for those readers, sophisticated readers who are aware of that, they're skeptical of that. Well, is there really a division? Are you sure that you're not really following as a reporter? Aren't you reading the editorials and seeing?
Yeah, don't you know what the boss thinks?
Doesn't he know what? So the short answer is no, we don't. We don't pay attention to that at all.
In fact, we're kind of ornery, and if anything, kind of go against that.
If anything, there's there's always tension there, and that's a good tension to have. We don't take our marching orders from that side at all, and similarly, they don't sort of decide what their opinions or which essays they're going to sort of commission based on where the news reporting is going. So that strict division is really important to convey to readers. And what is liberal then? Is our news report liberal? I mean, that's a criticism that, fine, you can lob that at us. I would disagree with that if you look at it carefully. I'm sure our publisher and our editors would disagree with that. So do not confuse the liberal position of the editorial page or of opinion editors, for that matter, with the news report itself, because we're driven by the facts. We're driven by what is happening and what are the stakes of what is happening. That's the most important thing for us.
Ed, what's the impact of the digital era now that so much of the news is disseminated online, and accuracy is very important, but so is speed in a way it never was before?
Yeah, so certainly the Times newsroom has sped up. We have a format called Live, for example, that we're essentially kind of blogging the news at a moment, up to the minute, especially, again, last night is an example of the tariffs that Trump announced or any big sort of news event. But we have so many editors' eyes on this, what we call our live blog, and there's a lot of scrutiny and there's a lot of attention paid to how we're phrasing, even down to the sentence. So the same level of sort of journalistic excellence is applied to that. So yes, we are speaking the language of the internet in that way. The other thing that's happened is the internet has sort of made armchair experts out of everyday readers. They think they, see a Wikipedia entry and they think they're an expert on, sort of Israel, Gaza or something. And it's nice that there are a lot of readers who want to know more information. I think, the Times has an opportunity to kind of delve a little bit more into that. So we've had to change a lot of our approach at the Times in terms of, we do our own explainer stories now. We will go much deeper into a story beyond sort of, here's the top news and here's some, what we call the B matter, the background, right? The sort of the recent context. We might just go longer on some of these stories.
And also we let readers respond in many different ways as well.
We let readers respond. We have, our comment section is a very lively place. And in fact, we've now engaged more with readers in the comment section where they might have a question even, and our reporters will follow up with them, and actually something that might have been left on the cutting room floor, we will actually answer in the comments.
Yeah, a lot of good questions come in.
Exactly.
Quick last question, artificial intelligence. What role does that play in our news report, and how do we guard against the abuse of it?
So there's an AI team in place in the newsroom that has set up very, very specific guardrails around how we in the newsroom can use it. It's a tool like anything else. The telephone is a tool, computer is a tool, Google search is a tool, but it's always sort of used in a very careful way and knowing its limits. So, there is a lot of data analysis that we use AI for, photographic analysis that AI is used for, but even when we sort of deploy that specific kind of technology, we still want to verify it with human hands and human eyes and human sensibility. So the AI, as we use them, is not the end-all and be-all. It's just another tool like everything else that we've been using.
Edmund Lee, the trust editor at the New York Times, heading that trust team. That's it for this edition of Close Up, and for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You could catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.